Hey guys, tonight we're traveling back to a world of cold floors, flickering torches, and the constant vague scent of onions. It's the year 1382, or thereabouts, and you've just woken up in a tiny thatched hut with no memory of how you got here. Your head's throbbing, your blanket's just a burlap sack, and the wind is definitely blowing through the wall. Welcome to medieval life. You probably won't survive this. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know where you're tuning in from and what time it is where you are. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You open your eyes to a low, smoky haze. No, that's not a fog machine. It's the residual smoke from the fire pit in the center of the room. There's no chimney here, so the smoke just kind of vibes near the ceiling. You're lying on a lumpy mattress stuffed with straw, and based on the scratching noise near your ear, you're not alone. Probably just a rat, or a beetle. Or a beetle riding a rat, who knows? Outside, a rooster screeches like it's auditioning for a horror movie. But you're not sure what's worse, the cold air slicing in through the holes in the wall, or the hard-packed dirt floor beneath your hip that's somehow damp. You shift under the rough wool blanket, which smells vaguely like wet sheep and disappointment. Welcome to your medieval bedroom, if you can call it that. This single room is your kitchen, dining area, bedroom, and livestock hotel all rolled into one. Yes, there's a goat in the corner. No, you can't move it. You look for a bathroom and remember, oh, right? There isn't one. If you need to go, it's either the chamber pot or you brave the outhouse, just a few planks over a pit, swaying gently in the wind like a haunted treehouse. You rise shakily, only to remember that medieval mornings don't include coffee. They don't include socks either. Just your one pair of leather turn shoes, which feels suspiciously moist from yesterday's rain, or maybe it's pig slop. Let's not think about it. You try to warm yourself by the central fire pit, but it's little more than embers. You'd add more wood if you had some, but you don't. Fuel is precious, and your family's already burned half the stool you're sitting on. You huddle close, rubbing your hands together, watching as the mist of your breath curls into the beams above. There's a thin line of daylight creeping through the thatched roof, but not much heat. Historians still argue whether peasants truly felt the cold less or just complained less, possibly because their jaws were too frozen to speak. The room begins to stir. Your housemates, aka your whole family, start to wake up. In a space no bigger than a modern garden shed, you're all elbow to elbow. Grandma on the other pallet, two children snoring in a pile of rags, and your cousin coughing up something worrying by the door. Privacy isn't a concept here. If someone gets sick, everyone gets sick. And someone's always sick. Now comes the matter of dressing, which is simple because you don't have options. Just the same rough linen shirt and woolen tunic you've worn all week, possibly all month. You smell like sheep grease, and so does everyone else. It's oddly comforting. Like a family tradition or a curse. You bend to lace your shoes, wincing as your knees crack. You're only 26, but in medieval years, that's pretty much wise elder. Life expectancy stats can be misleading. Plenty of folks made it to 50 or 60, but infant mortality and disease dragged the average way down. That said, if you've already made it past childhood without a fatal fever, consider yourself lucky. Or perhaps just not yet unlucky. You step outside into a muddy path where chickens strut with authority and a cart creaks by, leaving behind a rich aroma of manure. The air smells faintly of wood smoke, wet hay, and last week's fish stew. You inhale deeply and try not to gag. Nature. You spot your neighbor dumping a bucket of something suspicious into the ditch. Waste disposal isn't exactly regulated here. Streets double as sewers. Sometimes triple as sewers. You dodge a puddle, then realize with horror it's not just water. Sleepy yet? Because this is only the beginning. Your stomach growls, your fingers are stiff, and your eyes are watering from the wind, but congratulations. You've made it 10 minutes into a medieval morning, and already you kind of want to go back to bed. Maybe not that bed, though. The rat moved. You're hungry, like really hungry. The kind of hunger where you'd happily eat a cold Pop-Tart if only someone would invent one already. But instead, you sit on a wobbling stool inside your damp little hut, eyeing the breakfast options, a crust of yesterday's bread, assuming someone didn't gnaw on it overnight, and a small, shriveled onion. Bon appetit. Medieval breakfast is not a cheerful affair. There's no hot tea, no buttered toast, and absolutely no cereal unless you count a handful of dry oats you chew with resentment. For most peasants, the first meal of the day is whatever's left over, edible, or not actively moldy. Even then, mold is sort of negotiable. You just scrape off the green fuzz and eat around it like a peasant sommelier. You break the bread with a satisfying crack, which also sends a flake of it shooting across the table like a tiny shuriken. It's tough, dense, flat, possibly also a weapon. That's because most medieval bread is made with a coarsely ground flour called maslin, a mix of rye and wheat or barley. It's cheaper, yes, but also gritty. Some loaves even contain trace amounts of ground up millstone. Yes, stone. If it feels like you're chewing gravel, you probably are. You munch slowly, trying not to chip a tooth because dental care, as we'll cover later, is basically good luck. Your teeth are already yellowing from years of poor nutrition and a near constant film of grime. Also, you haven't brushed them since, well, ever. Alongside the bread, someone sets down a cup of thin ale or sour milk, depending on what you have. No one drinks water. That's for laundry and sometimes dying. Even the cleanest stream can hide a festive assortment of parasites. Instead, people drink small beer, a weak ale that's safer than water and probably slightly more nutritious than air. The onion? Raw. There's no pan to fry in this morning, not enough fuel. So you chew it slowly, eyes watering, lips burning. It's pungent, sharp, and very medieval. Onions are cheap, easy to store, and surprisingly filling if you can ignore the taste of tears and regret. You glance over and notice someone in the household is holding a small pot of pottage. It's yesterday's dinner or the day before's stewed grains, a stray carrot, a few beans if you're lucky. Pottage is the great equalizer of medieval cuisine. It's not good, but it's warm. Sort of. Historians still argue whether people ate it cold in the morning by choice or because they were just too tired to heat it again. There's no salt, no spices, unless you've miraculously inherited a pinch of mustard seed or nettle from a neighbor. You did once find a bit of rosemary growing wild, but your cousin thought it was a weed and fed it to the goats. And no, there are no utensils either. You eat with your fingers or chew bread into scoopable bits. Knives exist, sure, but they're prized and often shared. You'd need to carry your own like a medieval BYOK policy. Spoons are more common, carved from wood, and often passed down through families. Imagine inheriting your grandfather's spoon. His actual, well-used, crusty wooden spoon. As you eat, the morning rhythm of the village kicks in. Someone outside is yelling about a missing chicken. A child races by chasing a dog who is chasing something smaller and probably edible. You overhear a neighbor angrily accusing another of hiding the good turnips. Tensions are already simmering, and it's not even mid-morning. You sigh. Breakfast is technically done. You're still hungry, but there's no second course, unless you count chewing on your sleeve for emotional support. Meals aren't meant to satisfy. They're meant to keep you alive until the next one. You'd dream of lunch if you thought there'd be one. You notice a pot hanging near the fire where it's slowly collecting warmth but barely cooking anything. That's dinner. It'll simmer all day, absorbing every last flake of barley or stray bit of cabbage the household can spare. A communal stew, again, with yesterday's flavor, maybe even last week's, depending on how long it's been recycled. Historians still debate whether the perpetual stew was a practical choice or just culinary Stockholm syndrome. Now comes the matter of cleanup. There's no sink, no soap. Just a bucket of grayish water, some sand for scrubbing, and a hope that no one licked the bowl before you did. The dishes, if they exist, are wooden or clay and fragile. One crack, and you're eating from a folded leaf for the next 2 weeks. The rest of your morning is spent making sure the hearth doesn't go out. Fire is life. Fire is food. Fire is warmth. Lose it, and you have to beg hot coals from a neighbor or try flinting it yourself, which is about as easy as starting a barbecue with a wet sock. At this point, your stomach is louder than the village bell, but there's nothing else to eat. You sit by the hearth, bundled in a threadbare cloak, and think about what you're craving. A warm croissant, a banana, one of those breakfast sandwiches with the melty cheese. But no, instead, you're mentally preparing yourself to walk miles for a bundle of sticks, haul water from the stream, and shovel out the pigsty, all before lunch. Which, again, is probably more bread. There's a knock or, more accurately, a stick-poking sound at the door. A neighbor has arrived, cheerful despite the cold. He's brought over a jug of kavas, a fermented grain drink that tastes like wet raisins and vinegar. You sip politely. It burns slightly, not in a fun way. He asks if you've heard the news. Someone in the next village found a turnip the size of a baby's head. That's today's gossip. By now, your energy is fading. The bread's wearing off, your joints ache, and you realize it's only 9 a.m. And still, you have to go outside. There's wood to gather, chores to tend to, someone else's cow to feed. Your reward at the end of the day? A chance to do this all over again tomorrow, hopefully without frostbite. This is breakfast in the Middle Ages. Brief, bleak, and onion forward. You step outside, hoping for a bit of fresh air, and immediately regret it. The road, if you can call it that, is more of a mudslide dotted with animal droppings, broken cartwheels, and something that might have been food once. Maybe. Probably not. The smell is earthy, sour, and unmistakably human adjacent. It's time for your morning trek, which could mean anything from going to church, gathering firewood, fetching water, or being roped into helping your neighbor chase his escaped pigs. Or if it's Sunday, all of the above. The walk itself isn't long in modern terms, maybe a couple of miles, but here, every step counts when your shoes are more like damp leather mittens stapled to your feet. Your route takes you past thatched cottages, some leaning slightly to the left, as if they've given up trying to stand straight. There's a stream nearby, but it's not for strolling or skipping stones. It's where people dump everything: dishwater, dye runoff, fish guts, and the occasional gossip. You tiptoe past, gagging slightly. The water moves, but not in a wholesome way. You wave politely at a woman, washing linens in a bucket with a stick, and something that smells like boiled nettles. She nods, wrinkles deepening like parchment. You want to ask how her day is going, but are afraid the answer might include words like abscess or rat bite fever. On the way, a group of barefoot children with snot-crusted faces zooms past you, shrieking with joy as they pelt each other with clumps of cold mud. You sidestep just in time to avoid a direct hit. Not out of dignity, just because you only have one outfit, and it already smells like regret. Everywhere you look, someone is walking. That's because most people in the Middle Ages never traveled more than a few miles from their birthplace. No bikes, no wagons unless you're fancy, and horses. Forget it. A horse is a high-value item like a medieval Ferrari. Most peasants never even touched one, let alone rode one. Today's mission is a simple one. Help your cousin deliver a sack of barley to the mill. It's heavier than it looks and lumpy in ways that suggest mice have been involved. You sling it over your back and trudge onward. The path becomes steeper, and your calves start burning after a few minutes, Because let's be honest, the only squats you've done lately involve dodging firewood. Along the road, you pass a makeshift shrine to a local saint, a small wooden cross surrounded by wilted flowers, old rosaries, and a chicken feather or two. Historians still argue whether people actually believe these roadside shrines held power or if they were more like spiritual insurance policies. Either way, you mutter a quick prayer, just in case. You finally reach the edge of town, where a few larger buildings cluster like gossiping aunties. The church steeple pokes the sky, and the village mill creaks rhythmically, its giant wheel turning in a slow, sleepy loop. The sound is oddly comforting until you remember the miller takes a fair cut of your grain. Fair, in this case, being entirely subjective. The miller is already shouting at someone when you arrive. Something about light sacks and underweight grain. You try to keep a low profile. He's got one of those faces that looks permanently annoyed, like someone just insulted his porridge. You hand off the sack and wait. No receipt, of course, just a nod, a grunt, and a vague promise to return the flour next week. Maybe Thursday, but not this Thursday. A different one. With your task done, you linger for a moment by the mill stream, staring into the water and trying not to think about how tired you already are. Your feet ache, your hands smell like burlap, and somewhere deep in your lower back, a tiny muscle is sobbing quietly. On your way home, you pass the village church. The bell chimes the hour with a sound that is, frankly, a bit passive-aggressive. Inside, you see a monk sweeping the stone floor with what looks like a pine branch. He hums a hymn under his breath, pausing occasionally to scratch at his robes, probably lice or fleas. Or both. You wave. He waves back with the hand that was just scratching. You stop by the communal bread oven next. It's warm, which is rare, and smells faintly of ash and overcooked dreams. You're not baking anything today, but sometimes people just come here to warm their hands or swap rumors about whose goose laid an egg the size of a plum. You overhear one woman whispering about a man who walked all the way to the next town and came back with gasp oranges. He might be a sorcerer, or just rich, or both. Your final detour is the village green, where several people are gathered around a wooden post. Someone's put up a notice scrawled in Latin, which you can't read. Most can't, but it's fun to pretend. You squint at the parchment, nod sagely, and murmur something about land taxes, just to sound informed. Before long, your cousin finds you and insists you help carry firewood back to the hut. He's already gathered a bundle the size of a small pony, and somehow you're expected to match it. You sigh, bend down, and lift. Your spine makes a noise like a distant church bell being struck by a chicken. By the time you make it home, your arms are noodles, your legs are jelly, and your stomach is actively revolting. You've walked nearly 6 miles today, lifted a full barley sack, and avoided stepping in only most of the village waste. And the day's still young. Modern life has many challenges, but you realize now, deeply, truly, that taking a walk in the Middle Ages is less about relaxation and more about survival. Or, as one monk once wrote, ambulimus ergo vivimus. We walk, therefore we live. Or maybe we walk, therefore we cry later in the hayloft. You arrive back home with firewood slung across your aching back, feet soaked, and stomach grumbling like a distant thunderstorm. Time to freshen up, except how? There's no sink. No hot shower, not even a damp washcloth waiting on a towel rack. Here in the Middle Ages, hygiene is an entirely different beast. A rarely seen, poorly understood, frequently smelly beast. You start with your hands because they're covered in soot, flour dust, and something sticky that might be sap or pig. There's a wooden bucket near the door filled with what used to be water. It's gone a bit grayish, possibly from being used multiple times for multiple purposes. Still, it's your best option. You dip your fingers in and scrub with a bit of coarse ash from the fire pit, like some sort of exfoliating punishment. No soap, at least not as you'd know it. Lye soap exists, but it's harsh and reserved mostly for laundry or desperate moments. People more often use sand, ash, or stale urine. Yes, urine. It has ammonia, which, fun fact, is great for degreasing wool and also your dignity. You wipe your hands on a rough cloth hanging by the door, which smells like it has not been properly dried since the last king's reign. A fly buzzes by. You wave it off lazily. It's probably the cleanest thing in the room. Time for the face. You splash a bit of cold water on your cheeks, which jolts you into full consciousness with the intensity of a slap from a damp towel. Your skin tingles, not from cleanliness, but from sheer surprise. You pat dry with your sleeve. Good enough, now the pits. The less said, the better. Most folks don't bathe regularly. The concept of a full-body wash is often reserved for holy days, special occasions, or moments of existential crisis. Instead, you freshen up with a quick rub-down, a linen cloth, a handful of fragrant herbs if you're lucky, and a lot of wishful thinking. Some people carried scented pouches, little sachets of dried lavender, thyme, or mint to tuck into their clothes. Not for fashion, but to fend off the worst of the body odor. You don't have one. You do, however, have access to crushed rosemary someone left behind, so you dab it under your arms like medieval deodorant. It sort of helps. There's no toothpaste, of course. You pick at your teeth with a chicken bone and chew on a twig. These chew sticks were early toothbrushes, fibrous little branches that, when frayed at the end, act as a natural scrubber. Historians still argue whether medieval people cared much about dental hygiene or just got used to the smell of their own mouths. You think about a bath, but that's a whole ordeal. First, you'd need enough water, then you'd need to heat it, which means more wood, more effort, and a tub that you likely share with everyone in the house, in strict order, oldest to youngest. Meaning, by the time it's your turn, the water's somewhere between lukewarm and biologically suspicious. Most homes don't even have a tub. If you're lucky, there's a large wooden basin stored under the bed, reserved for seasonal baths, medical emergencies, or baptisms. And it's rarely emptied between uses. That's how water scarcity works. Everyone dips in the same soup. Hope you enjoy floating wind. Urban bathhouses do exist, especially in larger towns, but they come with their own risks: disease, gossip, the occasional stabbing. Bathhouses are as much social spaces as they are hygiene centers. Think sauna meets speed dating, minus any real privacy. You sniff under your arm, still not great, but you're no worse off than anyone else. In fact, some people avoid washing too thoroughly. There's a belief that water can open the pores and let sickness seep in. Better to keep the dirt where it is, it might be protective. Sort of like medieval sunscreen, but for disease. Your hair, it's a situation. Longish, tangled, and shiny. Not from conditioner, but from a healthy layer of grease. You run your fingers through it and immediately regret doing so. Lice are common companions, and you try not to think about the itching sensation that's probably psychological. Probably. To deal with lice, people sometimes used mixtures of vinegar and herbs, or even bathed their scalps in warm urine. Yes, again with the urine. Or they wore linen caps day and night to trap the lice in their eggs, then burn the cap. Effective? Debatable? Fashionable? Not at all. Your clothes don't get much more attention than your body. They're rarely washed too fragile and expensive. Instead, they're aired out by hanging over smoke or left in the sun, where the wind does what it can. You do have a cleaner under tunic for feast days, but even that one's seen better decades. Most people just accept the scent of themselves as a fact of life. It's your personal musk. Now dressed, freshened, and relatively presentable by medieval standards, you're ready to rejoin society. Not that anyone's judging, the bar is low. As long as you're not actively steaming with visible stink lines, you're fine. The funny thing is, you start to get used to it. The itch, the smell, the ever-present feeling that something's crawling on you. It becomes background noise. You notice it less until someone walks by with a sprig of mint behind their ear, and suddenly you feel like the dirtiest human alive. But this is life here. You're not meant to be pristine. You're meant to be sturdy, hardy. Dirt and sweat are badges of survival. So you roll up your sleeves, ignore the smell of your feet, and head out the door with confidence. Because you may not be clean, but neither is anyone else. You're dressed sort of clean and fed, though fed might be a generous word for what that onion did to your insides. Now it's time to get on with the day's labor. Brace yourself. You're about to become intimately familiar with the inside of a pigsty. If you were imagining a peaceful medieval life of wandering meadows and humming folk songs while braiding wildflowers into your hair, well, no. Most of your day is spent doing backbreaking, mind-numbing labor with exactly zero ergonomic tools and a high probability of animal-related injury. Welcome to peasant work. You start by checking on the animals. The family pig is grunting impatiently, already rooting in the muck. She's your pride and joy, the closest thing this household has to a retirement plan. But she's also a liability she will bite if cornered and once ate an entire ladle. Feeding her involves shoveling a mixture of leftover scraps, oat husks, and what appears to be some form of fermented turnip stew into a trough. It smells like someone tried to pickle sadness. As you do this, she snorts and sneezes directly into your face. You blink, wipe your eyes, and carry on. It's too early to scream. After the pig, it's the chickens. They scatter in all directions when you approach, like feathered anarchists. You try to gather eggs, only to be pecked 3 times by a particular judgmental hen who clearly remembers that one time you dropped an egg in April. Once the livestock's sorted, it's time to head to the field. Today, you'll be helping reap barley, not for yourself, of course, but for the landowner whose estate you technically live on. You don't get paid in money. You get paid in the continued ability to not be evicted. It's a good deal if you enjoy sunstroke and chronic joint pain. The tools are basic. You're handed a sickle with a wobbly handle and told to mind the edge, which is code for "this has cut 3 thumbs this month." You trudge into the field behind a line of other workers, backs bent, hands blistering within minutes. Harvesting barley is slow, hot, and repetitive. The sun beats down, your back screams. Your hands are chapped and aching before you filled a single basket. And it's not even midday. Every now and then, you hear someone curse or groan or sing a rhythmic chant to keep the pace. Songs are crucial here. They pass the time, warn of danger, and, when needed, distract from how badly your feet hurt. A common tune today is about a fox stealing chickens and a farmer who cried so hard he turned into a puddle. You hum along. Occasionally, the reeve, the local field overseer, rides by on a wiry little pony, checking that no one's slacking. He has a stick he likes to point dramatically at workers who look tired. You consider pointing something back, but remember that you like having your kneecaps intact. You spot your cousin next to you, sweating through his tunic and muttering something about the good old days before the new taxes. You nod solemnly, even though you're pretty sure the good old days were just the same, but with slightly fewer rats. At some point, a field worker cuts himself badly on the sickle. There's no first aid kit. Someone wraps the wound with a strip of cloth, spits on it for luck, and tells him to lie in the shade until the bleeding slows down. He'll probably be fine, or not. Historians still argue whether medieval folk were more stoic or just constantly lightheaded from blood loss. Midday arrives, and with it, the promise of rest. You gather under a small tree where the breeze almost feels cool. Lunch is, predictably, more bread. A crust wrapped in cloth and tucked under your tunic to keep it warm. It's dry hard and tastes like yesterday's regret. Someone's brought cheese, though sharp, crumbly, and possibly made from goat's milk and stubbornness. You chew slowly, grateful for anything that isn't barley dust. Water is passed around in a shared flask. It's warm and vaguely metallic, but it's wet, and that's good enough. You take a sip, wipe your mouth with your sleeve, and stretch your legs. Then it's back to the fields. The afternoon shift is somehow worse. The sun hangs heavier, the work slows down, and your body starts to feel like it's turning into a knot of twine. Your back has staged a rebellion, and your palms now feature a charming variety of blisters. At one point, a cart breaks a wheel, spilling its load. Everyone rushes to help, not out of charity, but because it's an excuse to stand upright for 5 minutes. The reeve yells. You ignore him. Your legs are trembling, and your shirt is soaked through with sweat and hay dust. Toward evening, the shadows stretch long and thin, and the work finally winds down. You've harvested enough to fill several baskets, though your share of the actual barley will be negligible. Most goes to the Lord, some to the church, and what's left, well, you'll see it again as porridge. You head back home, carrying a bundle of twigs and a small handful of weeds you picked along the way nettles for cooking, maybe, or to rub on your arms like a medieval energy drink. You're covered in dirt, your hair has straw in it, your fingers are stiff. You sit for a moment on a log, just to breathe. But this is what daily life looks like for most people in the Middle Ages. Endless labor, aching limbs, and just enough food and fire to try again tomorrow. There are no weekends, no holidays unless the church allows it. And even then, you're expected to fast or flagellate or do something humbling. So if you were dreaming of chivalry and feasts and maidens and long gowns, well, those people exist, but they're not you. You're the one who keeps the barley moving, the pigs fed, and the fields turning from green to gold. And tomorrow, you get to do it all again. You stumble home from the fields with legs like boiled cabbage and hands that look like they lost a bar fight with a blackberry bush. The sky is beginning to darken slightly, not because it's late, but because the sun has dipped behind a particular moody-looking cloud. That means you have about an hour before the light fails completely. Unfortunately, there's still more to do. One of your cousins has come down with something again, and your uncle is talking about bad humors and how the goat has been acting strange. So that might be the reason. Medical science, as it stands, is mostly about guessing in herbs. Sometimes guessing at herbs. But right now, your concern is more immediate. Your tooth is throbbing. A sharp pulsing ache that started this morning and now feels like a tiny blacksmith is hammering away behind your jaw. You prod it with your tongue and wince. Swollen gum. A loose molar. Maybe even an abscess. You try not to panic. There's no such thing as a dentist, not one you'd want to meet anyway. You've heard stories. The village tooth drawer is a man who moonlights as a blacksmith and occasionally takes payment in chickens. His tools include iron tongs, leather straps, and, if you're lucky, a shot of very strong ale beforehand. You lie on your mat and try to distract yourself with chores, but the pain is building. Eventually, someone notices your pale face and tells you to go see Marta. Ah, yes, Marta. She's the village wise woman, cunning woman, or that lady who knows things and lives near the woods. People go to her for everything from love potions to pig ailments. She doesn't exactly have credentials, but she's seen things. She's probably done things. She also smells strongly of thyme and something burnt. Marta also recommends holding a hot brick to your jaw at night and says, quite seriously, that you should bury a frog under the full moon and whisper your symptoms to it, just in case. Historians still argue whether these kinds of folk remedies were symbolic, spiritual, or simply the best option in the absence of antibiotics. You thank her with a hunk of bread and a promise not to tell the priest. The church doesn't always approve of Marta's methods. But secretly, most of the village would rather visit her than the barber surgeon. Ah, yes, the barber surgeon. That's the other option. If things get worse, you can travel 3 villages over to a man who pulls teeth, sets bones, and occasionally performs minor surgery, all while cutting hair. He keeps his tools in a bucket. He sharpens them on a stone that also sharpens farming blades. Anesthesia, a strong drink, and 2 friends to hold you down. You've heard of trepanation, drilling a hole in the skull to release bad spirits, and you really don't want to get on that guy's good side. As the pain subsides just slightly, you reflect on how fragile your body really is here. A single bad tooth can kill you. Not metaphorically, actually. Infections can spread quickly. There are no antibiotics, no sterile environments, no real understanding of bacteria. If your immune system doesn't pull through, your fate is sealed. At best, you recover slowly. At worst, you end up in a shallow grave with a few coins on your eyes and a prayer no one remembers. An illness is always lurking. In the summer, fevers sweep through villages, taking children and elders in a matter of days. In winter, pneumonia and frostbite claim the weak. Childbirth is a gamble. Cuts turn septic. People whisper about the sweat, the bloody flux, the shaking sickness, and no one knows what causes any of them. You remember last spring when your neighbor's daughter caught something that made her skin turn red and peel like bark. She didn't survive. They burned her mattress, buried her quickly, and refused to speak of it again. In the background of your life, death is always hovering. But people adapt. They joke, they pray, they drink. Superstition blends with survival. Garlic cloves hang over doorways. Iron knives are left under pillows to ward off spirits. Holy relics are touched and kissed, even if they're just chicken bones passed off as saints' fingers. You're reminded of an old man in the village who swears by bathing in the creek every full moon to keep the black bile balanced. He still has all his teeth, so maybe there's something to it. Later that evening, a traveling tinker passes through with a cart of odd goods. Pots, ribbons, dried herbs, and miracles of miracles, a jar of honey. Real honey. Expensive, golden, and worth more than your shoes. You consider trading for it just to soothe your tooth. But instead, you buy a small wooden charm he claims will keep pain away. It's carved with a symbol you don't recognize. You wear it around your neck anyway, because hope is better than nothing. Back home, the family is quiet. Your cousin is coughing again. The baby won't sleep. You press the warm brick to your jaw and try not to think about what's festering inside your mouth. The taste of clove lingers, so does the worry. You lie down, wrapped in your blanket, staring at the flickering light of the hearth. You think of your options, Marta, the barber surgeon. A slow death by infection, or, with luck, a spontaneous recovery by the grace of whatever saint watches over teeth. You choose sleep for now, because tomorrow the tooth will still hurt, the fields will still need working, and no one gets to take a sick day in the Middle Ages. The morning comes far too soon. Your jaw still throbs, but there's no time to dwell. Today is market day. That might sound like a treat, an exciting excursion to a bustling hub of trade. Chatter, and maybe even a sweet bone if the stars align, but for you, it's just more walking, bartering, and being elbowed by a man who insists his onions are magic. You don't believe him, but you do need onions. You start by packing a few things to trade: a basket of eggs, 2 bundles of dried nettles, and one slightly lopsided clay bowl your uncle made after a vision involving mead and an accident with the kill. You tuck a bit of cloth over the basket, sling it on your back, and set out along the worn path that leads to the market square 2 villages over. The road is well-trodden and muddy. You pass other villagers with carts, donkeys, and if they're particularly lucky, mules. The air smells of manure, dew, and wood smoke. Somewhere in the distance, a rooster is having a midlife crisis. You push onward. After an hour of walking, you reach the outskirts of the market. It's louder than usual shouting, laughter, clinking coin. the occasional goat scream. The square is a chaotic patchwork of stalls made from wood, cloth, and hope. Everything is laid out on crates, carts, and blankets. Dried herbs, old shoes, fish so fresh they still look surprised, and an alarming number of dead rabbits. Market day is one of the only times you'll see a real variety of people. Peasants, sure, but also craftsmen, friars, traveling merchants, and once a real knight. He was drunk and bought 5 turnips. Your first stop is the herb woman. She's older than leather and has a face like a dried apple. You trade your nettles for a tiny pouch of dried chamomile. It's good for calming nerves, stomach aches, and apparently warding off demons. Triple use. Next, you attempt to sell your eggs. Unfortunately, 2 have cracked. One was already cracked when you packed it. Oops. You end up bartering the rest for half a loaf of honeyed rye and a thin wedge of goat cheese. Not a bad deal, all things considered. You tuck the food away and turn to browse. You find a stall selling combs carved from bone. Another has brightly dyed wool, a luxury you can't afford, but you admire it anyway. A young boy is juggling apples and offering them for sale, which seems clever until he drops one and steps on it. You pause near a man selling iron nails and small tools. Among them, real scissors, sharp, shiny. You don't need them, but you want them. You stare too long. He offers a trade. Your clay bowl and the remaining crust of bread from your basket. You hesitate. That bowl could be useful. Then again, your uncle's planning to make 10 more this week. You make the trade. Scissors in your pouch, you feel almost rich. Tools are status symbols in a place where everything is labor. You walk with a little more confidence until you reach the tax collector. Oh yes, him. Seated beneath a canvas awning is the village bailiff. Or, as most people know him, that man who always looks like he's smelled something bad. He's not a noble, but he works for one, which makes him powerful enough to ruin your week with a frown and a wax seal. He's collecting taxes today, part of your grain, a few coins if you have them, and 1 egg from every household. You sigh, hand over your share, and try not to mutter anything that could be overheard and misconstrued as sedition. Next to the bailiff is the church tithe collector. He's wearing brown robes and a patient smile, but the look in his eyes says, "Give us the barley or we'll pray at you aggressively." You offer a pinch of dried herbs and a whispered apology. He nods. God sees your struggle, apparently. After taxes and tithes, you have very little left, but that's normal. Market day isn't about turning a profit. It's about keeping the cycle spinning. You get what you need. You make sure you're seen contributing. You survive. It's not capitalism. It's subsistence pageantry. Still you linger. Because the market is also the village's social media, news travels here, gossip blooms. You overhear snippets. A new priest arrived 2 towns over and immediately fell in the duck pond. Someone claims to have spotted a real live bear in the woods, though no one believes them. A merchant has spices from the east, cardamom and saffron, and is charging enough to buy a small house. You spot Marta. She's selling salves and giving someone unsolicited advice about their foot demons. You wave. She ignores you. Classic Marta. Eventually, you stop by the entertainment corner. A juggler is tossing knives. A puppet show is just wrapping up something about St. George and a dragon who wanted to open a bakery. The kids are enthralled. You catch the tail end of the performance. The dragon is told to repent and is immediately bonked on the head with a foam bishop's hat. Laughter erupts. You smile. For a moment, you forget your sore tooth, your aching arms, your empty stomach. Then the clouds roll in, fast. Rain comes without warning, sudden, sharp, and personal. Merchants scramble to cover their wares. People scatter. You grab your scarf and wrap it tight, basket held overhead as a makeshift roof. The road home is sloppier than before, the mud now more ambitious. Your boots squelch with every step. But you've made your trades. You have cheese, chamomile, and scissors. A good haul. At one point, you slip and fall into a ditch. You laugh, because what else can you do? You're covered in wet moss and cow footprints. There's a worm in your sleeve. Still, nothing's broken except your dignity, and that wasn't doing great to begin with. You arrive home soaked, tired, and faintly smelling of pickled herring from someone else's stall. The fire is going. Dinner is the same as always. But tonight, you share your cheese, sip warm nettle tea, and pass the scissors around like royal treasure. Market day may not be glamorous, but here, it's a lifeline. A rare link to the outside world, to news, to tools, to food. It's a brief flash of color in the gray routine of medieval life. And even with the rain, the taxes, and the ditch incident, you almost feel lucky. Today begins with a knock, or more accurately, a series of dull, impatient thuds on your wooden door. You sit up gradually on your straw mat, hair sticking up like an unkempt haystack, and glance toward the sound. A voice calls out through the cracks in the timber. Get dressed, we've been summoned. Summoned? That's rarely a good sign. It's either the bailiff again, or worse, something to do with the manor. You throw on your damp tunic, still smelling faintly of yesterday's ditch, and slip your sore feet into your stiff boots. Outside, a small group of neighbors is already gathering. Your cousin fills you in with an eye roll. We're needed at the Lord's estate. Something about a levee, probably ditch digging, or roof thatching, or plague pits, you sigh. That sounds about right. You begin the long walk up the winding lane that leads to the manor house, the local seat of power, wealth, and most importantly, labor demands. Most of the land in your village belongs to the Lord, including the fields you harvest and the woods you're not technically allowed to hunt. The manor looms at the top of a hill. It's no castle, but it's solid stone walls, real glass, and a few windows, and even a small garden where flowers grow for no reason other than looking pretty. You briefly entertain the idea of becoming a lord. Then you remember that your family has owned the same 3 goats for 4 generations. As you arrive, a steward with an aggressively feathered hat explains that you've been selected for a labor tax. It's your turn to provide corvée-free labor owed by peasants in place of rent. Today's assignment? Helping repair the manor's outer fence and clearing stones from the sheep pasture. Not glamorous. Not optional. You're handed a rusted spade and a wheelbarrow that leans left even when empty. The steward gestures vaguely toward a pile of logs, broken fencing, and about 3 metric tons of rocks. You and a dozen other villagers get to work. And so begins your experience with noble service. Not the kind where you carry goblets at feasts or learn courtly manners, but the kind where you develop blisters in places you didn't know could blister. The fence posts are heavy, splintered, and completely indifferent to your complaints. The ground is hard-packed and full of stubborn roots. At one point, you dig up a perfectly round stone that looks like it's been waiting centuries just to mess with you. Meanwhile, the manor's livestock watch as you work. The Lord's sheep are fatter than yours and clearly better fed. One bleats in a tone that feels mocking. You briefly consider throwing a rock at it, then remember you're technically on sacred ground land owned by someone close to God, or at least close to someone who claims to speak for him. The steward checks in occasionally just to scowl. He mutters about lazy peasants and how the fence must be up before the next inspection. You wonder if he's ever lifted anything heavier than his own ego. By midday, your shoulders are on fire. You break for a bite of dried apple and the last of yesterday's rye bread. There's water from a communal jug, and someone starts a whispered debate over whether the Lord actually drinks wine every night. That seems almost obscene liquid that tastes good and gets you drunk. Still, some of the villagers gossip more openly here than back home. The manor is a pressure valve, a chance to complain safely well, sort of. You learn that the Lord is thinking of taking a second wife, that the priest once fell asleep during confession, and that Marta may or may not have hexed a chicken who pecked her too hard. Someone mentions that the manor once had an indoor toilet. Not like ours, they explain, just a wooden box over a hole in the wall. You picture it and shudder. Still, compared to your own latrine, a drafty plank over a pit where spiders live, it sounds luxurious. By afternoon, you're hauling stones into the pasture. The ground is riddled with rabbit holes and treacherous dips, and you nearly twist your ankle twice. Still, the sheep now have fewer hazards to trip on, not that they seem grateful. And then you see him, the Lord. He appears at the edge of the field, mounted on a tall, sleek horse, cloak fluttering just slightly in the breeze. He's not young, but he's well-fed, pink-cheeked, and impeccably dressed, meaning he owns a tunic that hasn't been mended 20 times. He says nothing, just surveys the scene. His gaze drifts over you, lingering no longer than it would on a hedge. Then he nods once, as if approving the rocks you've moved, and rides off toward the manor without a word. It's humbling, in the same way being rained on while hungry is humbling. You're reminded of your place. Not bitterly, not even angrily dashed, just ... wearily. The hierarchy is baked into the world like grain into bread. Lords have land. You work it. That's how things are. Historians still debate how much power the peasantry actually had in day-to-day affairs. There's evidence of subtle resistance-delayed labor, secret harvests, collective bargaining through gossip, but on the surface, obedience is everything. Keep your head down, do the work, hope for a mild winter. As evening approaches, the steward finally dismisses you. You trudge back down the hill, sore and sunburned, your clothes streaked with dirt and pride. Your cousin hums a tune under his breath, a working song, slow and lilting. You join in, too tired to care how off-key you are. At home, dinner is simple. Porridge with a few wild leeks stirred in. You eat it slowly, the warmth soaking into your bones. Someone brings up the Lord's brief appearance. You all agree he looks slightly shorter than expected, and then you laugh. Because in a world where status defines everything, making fun of your Lord's height quietly, around the hearth, is the closest thing to justice you'll ever know. You wake in a cold sweat, your body trembling as if you've lain too close to a winter stream. At first, you think it's just another sleepless night until you notice the fever's real, the chills sharper than the morning wind. You press a hand to your forehead. It's burning. Something is very, very wrong. Your first clue should have been the swollen lump behind your ear, the one you thought was just another swollen gland from last week's cough. Now it pulsates like a tiny drum. That, combined with the ache in your limbs and the burning sensation when you swallow well, congratulations, you've likely caught a mild case of plague. Mild, of course, by medieval standards, horribly dangerous, but slightly less so maybe. The term plague covers multiple diseases: bubonic, septicemic, pneumonic, but back here, they're all lumped together under the umbrella of divine punishment or miasma. People believed foul air, corrupted humors, or sins committed generations ago raised the sickness. Historians still argue whether medieval plagues were truly Yersinia pestis or a host of other fever-causing maladies. Either way, you're in for a rough ride. Your family gathers around as you groan, pressing cool cloths, actually strips of linen soaked in cold stream water, to your forehead. Someone sprinkles lavender oil on the cloths. Lavender is said to ward off evil spirits and improve breath, if only slightly. You're grateful for both uses. Marta arrives, carrying her herbal satchel and a look of solemn determination. She doesn't touch you. Fear of contagion is strong, even if she doesn't fully understand germs. Instead, she ties a fresh bundle of rue and wormwood around your neck as an amulet. Keeps the bad air away, she says, though you can't tell whether it's meant literally or to inspire courage. Probably both. Your temperature spikes again. You shiver so violently, the bedroll rattles beneath you. Someone brings a candle close so you can see their worried face. Your mother, cheeks pale and eyes red from sleepless nights. She whispers a prayer and sprinkles consecrated water on your chest. At least the church gets involved quickly when death arrives at the door. You try to drink water, but every swallow feels like you're swallowing embers. Instead, you sip small amounts of weak small beer warmed slightly to kill anything that might lurk inside. People drink hot ale when ill, believing warmth soothes the body and spirits. It's like medieval chicken soup without the soup. As the day drags on, your thoughts become foggy. You remember the neighbor who didn't survive last winter's fever? They said she was only congested at first, then couldn't breathe by nightfall. You wonder if your ribs will follow the same harrowing path. Historians still argue whether isolation huts were effective. In some regions, suspected plague victims were quarantined in huts at the edge of the village. No one dared visit. Families left food outside the door. You're not sent to one, but you might have preferred it. At least you could weep in peace. Your breathing grows raspy. Every cough feels like shards of glass in your throat. You clutch at the linens, pulling them tighter around your shoulders as if armor against an unseen enemy. Sweat soaks the cloth, and chills follow like a relentless second assault. Your teeth chatter, even though your jaw throbs less than it used to. Your cousin, normally boisterous, hovers by the doorway, looking ready to bolt. He holds a small clay bowl filled with broth made from ox bones, marigold petals, and a bit of honey. It smells like bitterness and hope. You sip it slowly, careful not to gag. If it helps draw out the poison or at least calm your stomach, it's worth it. Outside, the village life goes on in muted tones. You hear distant church bells tolling an afternoon mass, though today they ring more solemnly than cheerily. Someone stumbles past your window, wrapped in a blanket, coughing. They give your hut a wide berth. It's sobering to realize everyone sees you as a walking danger. Your mind swims, you see flashes of your life. Crisp bread at dawn, muddy paths, the Lord's indifferent gaze. You wonder if it all was worth it. Then guilt washes in. What about your family? If you die, they lose labor, partnership, hope. You try to speak, I'm fine, but only a raspy whisper emerges. Marta returns with another concoction, powdered orris root, rose petals, and a dash of crushed emerald, not for its color, but because some believe ground gemstones have healing powers. It's a fringe remedy, but desperate times call for desperate measures. You press the powder to your wrist, hoping your pulse picks up better news. Your temperature ebbs slightly, and for a moment, clarity returns. You feel too weak to celebrate. Instead, you lie still and pray. You pray for deliverance, for mercy, or for a swift end if mercy is overdue. You think of the saints, of relics you've kissed, of every church candle you ever lit. Now, you want someone to tell you which saint specializes in buboes and breathless nights. Your breathing constricts further. You feel overheated and chilled at once. It's paradoxical, like sitting by a hearth in the dead of winter without a cloak. You try to steady yourself, gripping the edge of the pallet. A bead of sweat trickles down your temple. You taste iron and fear. Time stretches. You lose track of hours. Voices drift in and out of the hut, your mother sobs, Marta's low humming chants, the distant sound of a rooster crowing. You wonder if you'll wake up again tomorrow. Then slowly, so slowly, it begins to shift. The fever recedes from a raging inferno to a manageable ember. Your jaw relaxes. You gasp less frequently. You open your eyes fully and see the loving, relieved faces staring back. It might be the batch of roux working, or the broth, or pure dumb luck. Or maybe, as some say, divine intervention. Historians still debate how many medieval victims truly survived plague compared to those we'd classify differently today. Records are murky, numbers exaggerated, and motives behind chroniclers' reports often political. But here you are, alive enough to be annoying again. The next days are a slow crawl back to health. Your strength returns in small measures. First enough energy to sit up, then to stand, then to shuffle outside for fresh air. You savor each moment, Sunlight on your face, breeze in your hair, the sound of birds you thought you'd never hear again. When you finally rejoin the chores, the village greets you with cautious joy. Some place sprigs of herbs above your door, others whisper prayers of thanks. You receive pats on the back that sting more than the sickness ever did. Recovering from plague is a gift. It changes you. You cherish clean water, wholesome food, and the simple act of breathing without pain. But you also carry scars, hair, loss, scars, and a lingering fear that maybe the next wave will catch you unprepared. And so your life resumes, muddy paths, chores, market days, and corvée. But now, each step feels precious. Each breath is victory. You survived what many did not. For now, that's enough. You're barely back on your feet when the summons comes again, this time not from the manor or the steward or the priest, but from something far more unpredictable, the weather. The skies have been brooding for days. Gray clouds loiter like gossiping neighbors, and the air tastes like iron and wet stone. You know that smell, the smell of a storm that doesn't just soak your tunic, but rearranges your entire week. When the first clap of thunder hits, you're already outside trying to fasten a patch over a hole in the roof with nothing but twine and a silent prayer to Saint Barbara, patron saint of not being struck by lightning. It doesn't work. The rain begins in earnest. What follows is not just a storm, it's a medieval monsoon, the kind that turns footpaths into swamps and thatch roofs into sieves. Your cottage leaks in 6 places, possibly 7, depending on how you count the corner where water drips with theatrical flair. Your job now is to manage damage. You scramble to move the few dry sacks of barley further from the encroaching puddles. The bedroll is damp. The dog, who has never been useful before, has claimed the driest corner and growls if anyone approaches. Outside, it's chaos. The fields are flooding. The village's one drainage ditch, a shallow gash filled mostly with broken pottery and regret, is quickly overwhelmed. Chickens have taken to higher ground. Someone's goat is missing. You think you hear it screaming upstream. Rain in the Middle Ages isn't just an inconvenience. It's a threat to food, shelter, and sanity. Without refrigeration, grain silos, or waterproof anything, villagers rely on good weather like modern people rely on electricity. When it fails, everything unravels. You and your family huddle together, sharing body heat and stories to pass the time. Someone jokes about building an ark. Someone else remembers the time lightning struck the priest's outhouse. That one gets retold twice. Hours pass, then days. The storm doesn't let up. You step outside to survey the damage on the 3rd day and sink ankle-deep into mud. The path to the well has vanished. The pig den is now a floating island. A neighbor, ankle-deep in water, waves cheerfully and informs you his privy is capsized. "We're free of it now," he adds, as if that's a win. You try not to think about how many outhouses have floated into the drinking water. The storm eventually wanes, but the aftermath lingers like spoiled milk. The fields have been churned into brown soup. Crops, especially the barley and oats, lie drowned under inches of water. There's talk of rot, blight, and famine. You start mentally calculating how long your cheese and dried beans will last. And then the real crisis starts. Mildew. Everything is damp. Your clothes, your bedding, your boots, your soul. Honestly, a strange greenish fuzz begins to appear on the walls. Your cousin swears the mold near his bed winked at him. You'd laugh if your lungs didn't hurt from the damp air. With the roads impassable, market day is canceled. Supplies dwindle, the bread is thinner. The broth tastes increasingly like boiled disappointment. Someone tries drying grain over the hearth and ends up setting their sleeve on fire. You decide not to try it yourself. Desperation breeds creativity. You learn new ways to repurpose. Old straw becomes floor insulation. Broken bowls become scoops for bailing water. A leaking roof tile becomes a makeshift foot warmer when heated near the fire. As the sun finally peeks out, people emerge like grumpy hedgehogs. The village square is half submerged, but spirits lift. Children splash through puddles with the manic energy only damp medieval youth can summon. Elders sit outside, letting their bones dry like old parchment. You hang laundry with grim determination, but then comes the smell. Flooding has stirred everything. The animal pens, the compost heaps, the aforementioned floating privies. Now that the sun's out, so is the stink. It creeps into homes, clings to clothes, and settles deep in the pores of every building. You smear crushed mint on your upper lip to survive it. To make matters worse, there's now a rise in vermin. The rats are thriving, fat from whatever floated their way. Cats, if you have them, are overworked and underfed. Dogs refuse to chase rodents anymore. They've unionized, someone says, pointing to a dog that now sleeps on the church altar like royalty. You get assigned to help repair communal infrastructure, specifically reinforcing the bridge over the stream that has, thanks to erosion, moved slightly west and now flows through the blacksmith's shed. You spend 2 days hauling rocks, stacking logs, and arguing over whose idea it was to build the bridge with exactly zero foundation. The bridge holds barely. You test it by walking across with a bag of bricks. It creaks ominously. You turn around and add 2 more logs for good measure. Then comes the news you've been dreading, the crop inspection. Every few months, the steward or his appointed assistant this time, a sullen man with a runny nose and a feather that looks like it came off a very stressed duck, comes to assess the fields and measure what's due to the Lord. You try to explain that the barley drowned, the oat patch became a pond, and the onions never stood a chance. He nods, writes it down, and says, "The tithe is still due." You argue, politely, fervently. You even gesture dramatically at the sky. He nods again. God's will. But the Lord still needs bread. So the village meets. Tensions rise. Some suggest refusing the tithe. Others suggest hiding grain. Marta offers to curse the steward, but only if she gets her pot back from the last hex. In the end, you all agree to pool the least wet grain and offer it up. If you're lucky, the Lord will accept it as symbolic payment and defer the rest. Luck, as it turns out, is in short supply. The steward returns 2 days later with guards. They confiscate the usable grain and issue a warning. Miss the next tithe, and consequences will follow. Consequences, you're reminded, are not abstract. They include additional labor taxes, confiscation of livestock, and if things escalate, flogging. You swallow your pride along with a handful of sour bread and vow to save better next time. But in truth, there's no way to save against a storm like this. Nature has no master. It doesn't care about manners or markets or mules. It comes when it wants, leaves when it pleases, and always takes more than it gives. Yet, even in all this, life finds ways to carry on. You see it in the woman who uses soggy wool to weave rope, in the boy who builds tiny boats from bark and floats them in the puddles, in your neighbor who, despite losing half his tools to the flood, carves a new comb and gifts it to his wife because her hair is still the prettiest thing I've ever seen. You smile despite the mildew, despite the rat that just ran across your foot, despite everything. You've made it through a medieval storm and you're still standing, slightly moldy, possibly cursed, but standing. By now, you've come to accept that your daily existence in medieval times is a finely tuned dance between survival, mild suffering, and the occasional small joy, like a warm bowl of peas that didn't taste like mud. But if there's one constant, one institution that looms larger than lords, storms, or even Marta's herbal optimism, it's the church. Today's a feast day, again. It feels like every third day is a religious holiday, and honestly, that's not far off. Between saints' days, fasts, vigils, and obscure celebrations like the Feast of the Translation of St. Cuthbert's Elbow, your calendar is littered with events. You can't read the calendar, of course, but Brother Aldrich can, and he takes great pleasure in announcing when you're allowed to eat cheese again. Today's feast honors Saint Benedict, patron of monks, school children, and people who really enjoy quiet libraries. You're not quite sure why that's cause for celebration, but hey, no work in the fields. That's a win. You dress in your second best tunic and join the slow procession to the village church. It's a squat stone building with uneven walls, a wooden door that groans when opened, and the faint permanent smell of incense, mildew, and sheep. Inside it's dim and cool. Sunlight filters through narrow, cloudy windows, and the air buzzes with whispers and coughs. You kneel beside your family on a wooden bench that was clearly not designed for comfort. Your knees pop audibly. You hope God isn't listening too closely to your joints. Brother Aldrich begins the Latin Mass. You understand maybe 1 word in 20, but the tone is familiar and oddly soothing, part lullaby, part ancient chant, part mumble. His sermon today involves the parable of the dishonest steward, or possibly the dishonest cow. His accent is thick. You sneak a glance at the wooden ceiling. It's painted with faded saints, stars, and one suspicious-looking squirrel. The squirrel might be symbolic, or the artist just got bored. After Mass comes the real highlight, the feast. Not a royal banquet, mind you, this is more like a communal picnic where half the food is lentils. But there's bread, cheese, a bit of salted fish, and praise be ale. Everyone gathers in the green beside the church. A cloth is laid on the grass. You sit cross-legged, balancing a bowl of pottage and trying not to spill it on your one clean sleeve. Children run barefoot, chasing each other with sticks. Elders trade stories, some possibly true, and then come the miracle plays. These are religious dramas performed by villagers with costumes made of sackcloth, fake beards fashioned from wool, and props borrowed from the inn. Today's play is about St. George, again. He fights a dragon and saves a maiden. It's both profoundly moving and completely ridiculous. You laugh. Everyone does. Even Brother Aldrich cracks a smile when the dragon gets stuck under a cart and breaks character to yell, "My foot." Feast days are more than religious obligations, they're psychological lifelines, a break from toil, a sanctioned reason to sit still, to remember joy, to laugh at the absurdity of a world where dragons are cloth and salvation depends on how well you fasted during Lent. Still, the church is everywhere. Its bells mark your hours. Its fast days control your diet. Its rules govern your marriages, your confessions, your inheritance, and even how you bury your dead. It's both spiritual anchor and bureaucratic juggernaut. You remember how, last year, your cousin wanted to marry a girl from the next village over. But the priest discovered they were third cousins once removed by goat and declared it improper. They had to pay for a special dispensation and note from a bishop saying, "Fine, I guess," before they could wed. Ties, too, are a part of life, a tenth of everything, grain, eggs, labor, given not just to the village church, but to the wider ecclesiastical network. Sometimes when the crops are lean and your stomach is tighter than your boots, you wonder where it all goes. But despite the power and the rules and the unending Latin, you do feel comfort here. You like the stories, even the confusing ones. You like lighting candles for relatives and watching the flame flicker with purpose. You like the idea that someone, somewhere, might be listening. You particularly like Saint Drogo, the patron of coffee, shepherds, and unattractive people. He sounds like he'd get along with your goat. After the feast winds down, the villagers linger. A boy plays a reed pipe. A woman hums a harvest song. You help stack empty bowls and are rewarded with a heel of bread and a wink from the baker's daughter. You blush and drop it. The bread, not the wink. Back at home, you feel the glow of full belly and spiritual buffer. You hang your tunic to dry and stretch out on your mat, wondering how a single church can carry so much power and yet still need Marta to chase rats from the choir loft. You don't fully understand theology. You don't know whether heaven has fences or what purgatory smells like. But you do know that in a world where nothing is certain, not the weather, Not your health, not your Lord's moods. Faith gives people structure. You fall asleep to the sound of distant bells and quiet laughter. A feast day has ended. Tomorrow, you return to mud and toil. But tonight, you dream of dragons made of cloth and saints who listen kindly when you kneel with aching knees in clumsy Latin. You wake to an unusual sound silence. No goats bleating, no Marta yelling at birds, no clanging from the blacksmith's forge. Just the crisp, eerie stillness of dawn that feels like the entire village is holding its breath. You sit up slowly, rubbing your eyes and feeling the ache in your back from too many nights on straw. Something's off. The air feels tense. Your cousin pokes his head through the doorway, eyes wide. Something's happened, he says. Outlaws. Ah, there it is. Banditry is a fact of medieval life. Roads are long, forests are thick, and law enforcement consists mostly of fear, guesswork, and the occasional hanging to make a point. You've heard tales of travelers being robbed between villages, of merchants ambushed near river crossings, but this time they've come closer. Too close. A group of bandits raided a merchant caravan just 2 miles from the village. Word travels fast, especially bad news. The merchant was robbed of spices, tools, and bolts of rare fabric items far too valuable for ordinary peasants to even dream of. The guard hired to protect him was wounded, and one of the cart pullers vanished entirely. Some say he joined the bandits. Others say he's soup now. No one really wants to investigate. The village reacts with the same logic it applies to most disasters. Get very nervous, then overcompensate. A quick meeting is held near the green, with every man and most of the braver women gathering to discuss the defense plan. It's not much of a plan, if you're honest. More of a communal panic with some sticks and wishful thinking. The reeve, who normally coordinates taxes and grain counts, is suddenly a military commander. He hands you a pitchfork. It's slightly bent and smells like manure. If they come, he says solemnly, poke hard. You nod, not reassured. Marta offers to craft protective charms. She ties little sachets of dried yarrow and garlic and insists they'll keep out evil. You hang one on your door, partly for spiritual protection and partly because garlic smells better than your usual laundry. Meanwhile, the village starts nightly watches. Pairs of nervous peasants take turns staying awake, patrolling the edges of the fields and the road leading to the woods. You're assigned the worst shift, second half of the night, when it's darkest and the owls seem unusually judgmental. You arm yourself with a wooden club and a candle stub and stand by the edge of the cabbage field, trying not to fall asleep on your feet. You hear every rustle, every breeze, every squeak of nocturnal rodents that are definitely not bandits, but still manage to scare you a little. Historians still argue whether medieval banditry was purely criminal or partially political. Many outlaws were former soldiers, displaced peasants, or men driven by famine and frustration. Some even had local support, robbing the rich and sharing spoils in Robin Hood fashion. But in your world, they're just danger with muddy boots. Days pass. Tension hangs in the air like smoke. Every stranger is eyed with suspicion. A traveling peddler is detained for questioning just because he has shifty eyes. Turns out he just has hay fever. The Lord Steward arrives to assure everyone that patrols have increased and the crown is aware. But nobody's seen a royal soldier in months, and the steward spends most of his visit drinking your ale. Then one morning, you wake to find hoof prints near the edge of the woods. Not horse-drawn cart tracks, real riding horses, at least 4. The soil is soft from last night's rain, and the impressions are clear. Your stomach knots. There are no local riders with horses that big. You and a few others follow the tracks to the riverbank, where you find discarded food wrappers, a burnt-out fire, and a few bits of cloth. One smells like cloves and sweat. Another has a fancy stitch along the hem noble clothing, maybe, looted from the merchant caravan. Either way, they've been here. You return to the village quickly, alerting the reeve. A small council is called again. Some argue for armed confrontation. Others want to flee. One man proposes offering a tribute grain and ale in exchange for mercy. Marta volunteers to deliver it, claiming she's on good terms with forest energy. Eventually, the village settles on a defensive stance, reinforce the palisade, hide the good tools, and hope the bandits move on. You help patch the crude wooden fence that rings the village, driving stakes deeper into the mud and weeding thorny bramble into the gaps. It's not elegant, but it'll give any attacker at least a few scratches. At night, your cousin suggests making traps. He digs small pits and lines them with pointed sticks. You help, though you worry more about the pigs falling in than the bandits. The days stretch on, tense and quiet. No attacks. No sightings. You begin to wonder if they've moved on. Perhaps they found richer pickings downriver someone with a coin pouch and worse defenses. But one evening, just as the sun begins to set in that soft golden way it does when it wants to lull you into a false sense of peace, the bell rings. The village bell, normally used for fire warnings or calling everyone to hear the priest's lecture on gluttony, is now clanging urgently. You drop your bundle of firewood and run. They're here. Not in force, not an army, just 3 figures at the edge of the road, cloaked and quiet. They make no move to attack. They stand there, staring, watching. Someone shouts. A stone is thrown. The figures melt back into the woods, silent as deer. You wait all night. Nothing happens. In the morning, they're gone again. But the fear remains. This is the cruel trick of violence in the medieval world. It doesn't always come when expected. Sometimes it hangs over your head for weeks, draining your nerves and souring your food. It's the threat that poisons the well. Still, life must resume. You return to chores with an eye on the trees. The fields need clearing. The goats need milking. One of them, your favorite, has developed a limp and insists on being carried. You oblige, of course, because you're a pushover. You try to sleep at night, but your dreams are filled with rustling leaves and heavy footsteps. You wake with a start whenever a twig snaps outside the hut. You tell yourself it's just the wind, or the chickens, or Marta's weird sleepwalking. Eventually, the tension fades, not because the danger is gone, but because it's exhausting to stay alert forever. You learn to live with uncertainty. You go back to using the front door instead of climbing out the back to avoid ambush spots. You put your club back in the corner. You stop looking for hoof prints. But you remember, and so does the village. The fence stays up. The watches continue, less frequent, but still organized. And every child now knows the rule. If you see someone in a hood with no face, you run. And that's how you survive medieval outlaws. Not with swords or glory, but with community, caution, and a really, really thorny fence. You're scraping the last of the grain from a cracked bowl when the sound of trumpets drifts in from the road. Not the blaring kind. This isn't a royal procession, but the uneven squawk of homemade instruments played with enthusiasm, if not skill. Something is happening. You step outside, squinting toward the source. A dust cloud rises over the village path, and out of it emerges. A parade? Well, a medieval version of a parade, anyway. There's a juggler balancing on stilts made of tree branches. A man wearing a painted wooden mask dances beside him, banging a drum that's really just a hollow log. Behind them trots a brightly dressed woman with bells sewn into her sleeves and a painted goat on a leash. The goat looks unimpressed. Fairs come early, someone whispers beside you. Of course, the traveling fair. Once, maybe twice a year, if the roads are dry and the bandits sparse a wandering troupe of entertainers. Merchants and performers arrives to flood your quiet little village with music, color, and an intoxicating mix of wonder and suspicion. They bring wares you've never seen before, embroidered cloth from the next shire over, sugared figs, tin mirrors, knives with decorative hilts. You even spot a polished rock labeled healing stone being sold for 3 eggs. You're skeptical, but Marta buys two and immediately tries to sell one back to you at a profit. Children dart between booths, wide-eyed. The younger ones clutch small clay whistles shaped like birds. The older ones stare dreamily at the traveling acrobats, clearly considering a life on the road. You know the feeling? Everyone does. A few days of exotic noise and open-air dancing make the rest of the year feel unbearably gray. But you've also heard the rumors. Some say the performers are spies, or heretics, or sorcerers. One of them definitely has a tattoo, and you're pretty sure one man speaks in riddles just to mess with people. Still, your feet lead you forward. You trade a handful of nuts and some firewood for a turn at the fortune teller's tent. Inside, it smells like candle wax and lavender. A woman in layered shawls beckons you forward. Her voice is low, musical. You have a restless soul, she says, holding your hand. You were born for more than mud. You blink. It's both vague and surprisingly accurate. She shuffles a set of painted cards. One shows a tree with roots that turn into chains. Another, a rising sun behind a pair of scales. The last is a chicken in a crown. She nods solemnly. You will rule, but only among poultry. You laugh. She doesn't. Still, you leave feeling oddly validated. Back outside, the festivities ramp up. The juggler now juggles flaming sticks. The goat has acquired a flower crown. A small stage is set up for storytelling. You settle on the grass beside neighbors and listen as a bard recounts tales of distant lands, kings with silver eyes, oceans that breathe, a city built upside down on purpose. Historians still debate the accuracy of these medieval performers. Some clearly made up their stories whole cloth. Others traveled far and brought fragments of real places and people. It's impossible to know which is which, but here it doesn't matter. What matters is the escape. Later, at the edge of the green, you watch a puppet show. The puppets are worn but expressive. They reenact the fable of Reynard the Fox, a clever trickster who outwits pompous lions and greedy wolves. The crowd laughs, especially when the priest puppet gets bopped on the head with a fish. You think of the steward, of the bandits, of the tithes. The fox's cleverness feels like rebellion in miniature. You cheer when he escapes justice once again. Then comes the dancing. It starts with the musicians, a fiddler with only 2 strings, a drummer with very large shoes, and a flutist who plays sideways for unknown reasons. The music is fast, slightly off-key, and completely irresistible. You find yourself pulled into a circle. Arms link, feet shuffle. The steps are simple: 2 forward, 1 back, spin, but your body aches in protest. Still you laugh, spun around by a girl who might be Marta's niece or possibly her goat apprentice. Your cousin joins in, stomping with wild abandon. Someone brings out ale. The air smells of sweat, hay, and whatever someone just roasted on a stick. You hope it's lamb. You hope it's not rat. You eat it anyway. As the sky darkens, torches are lit. Their flickering light dances across faces, young, old, exhausted, ecstatic. For this one evening, the village feels alive in a way it rarely does. There's magic in the air, not the kind that turns frogs into princes, but the kind that turns peasants into people who feel seen. You talk to a performer who once saw the sea, the real sea. He describes it as a living, endless thing, gray and blue and angry, full of ships and songs. You tell him you've only seen the village pond. He doesn't laugh. A girl recites riddles by heart. An old man sells tooth powders that taste like mint and feel like gravel. Someone juggles 3 apples and eats them mid-spoon. A boy teaches you to whistle through an acorn cap. You manage a wheeze that vaguely resembles a duck sneezing. He applauds like you're a genius. Historians still debate the role of fairs in shaping medieval cultural exchange. For many villagers, they were the only glimpse of the outside world. You now understand why people long to run away with the troupe. It's not just the novelty, it's the feeling of freedom. But fairs are temporary. By dawn, the tents are being folded, wagons are packed. The goat is still wearing her crown, though she looks even less impressed than yesterday. You watch as the performers mount carts and begin their slow roll toward the next village. You walk alongside them for a minute or two, imagining what it would be like to join. To sleep under stars, tell stories for coin, eat sugared fruit, and name yourself something ridiculous like Elwyn the Dancing Fire. It's a nice dream. Then your cousin yells that the pigs have escaped again. Of course they have. You wave farewell, turn back, and trudge toward your pen, which now contains 2 pigs and 1 highly confused sheep. The fair is gone, but for days, the village hums with its echo. People retell the stories, kids mimic the juggling. Marta starts calling herself Herbalda the Wise, and no one stops her. Even the priest seems a little softer, though he insists the puppet show was doctrinally questionable. You still carry your fortune in your pocket, a scrap of painted parchment with the crowned chicken. You don't believe in magic, not really, but you believe in stories, in joy, and moments that remind you life is more than mud and taxes. And that maybe you're more than just a tired peasant with bad boots and a leaky roof. Maybe on the right day, with the right music and the right torchlight ... You could dance too. You're bent over in the field, hands raw from pulling thistles, when a shadow passes across the ground. At first, you think it's just a cloud, one of those puffy summer travelers drifting lazily across the sky, but then the air shifts heavier, quieter. You look up, and there it is, the night. Not a knight, you know. Not the bored son of a minor baron who once galloped through your village on a horse that definitely wasn't trained for mud. This one's different, taller, shinier, with a crest you don't recognize and armor that actually fits. And behind him, oh dear, comes a whole procession. Banner bearers, squires, a cleric muttering under his breath, and even a cart or 2 filled with wooden trunks. One is wrapped in iron bands and covered with a cloth that definitely contains either weapons or a very important cake. Probably not cake. The Lord Steward rushes out, flustered, his hair more vertical than usual. He exchanges words with the knight, gesturing toward the manor house. The knight says little, just nods. Then he lifts his visor, revealing a face that somehow manages to look both handsome and deeply inconvenienced. The kind of face that says, I was supposed to be jousting, not tripping over geese. You are about to return to your thistle war when your cousin jogs up, panting. He's here for levies. You blink. I thought that was just for war. It is, your cousin says grimly. I think there's going to be one. And just like that, your son returns. Levies for a medieval peasant are a lottery you never want to win. When a lord or monarch calls for war, able-bodied men are asked with varying degrees of choice to join the cause. You've heard stories. Some serve for a few weeks and return with shiny buttons and tailies of cities with glass windows. Others come back with missing limbs. Some don't come back at all. Historians still argue about how many peasants were actually conscripted into these medieval conflicts. Some regions enforced it rigorously, others made do with professional soldiers and paid substitutes. But where you live, it's real, and it's happening now. The next day, a list is posted on the church door. You recognize the names, neighbors, friends. A boy who once lost a bet and had to sleep with the chicken in his hood. Your cousin. And of course you. You've been levied. Your mother is quiet for the rest of the day. She mends your tunic, adding an extra layer at the elbows. For luck, she says. Your father sharpens a kitchen knife and says nothing. Marta brews something with dandelions and shoves it into a flask. Don't drink it all at once, she warns. It'll either give you courage or hallucinations. Depends on the weather. The village prepares your group like a ship about to sail into a storm. People offer extra cloth, dry bread, a pair of boots that might fit. The blacksmith hammers out 3 crude helmets, each one more lopsided than the last. You end up with the one that makes you look like a sad bucket. The morning of departure arrives like a sentence. You line up with the others 8 in total. The knight inspects you all. He does not look impressed. Peasants, he says to his squire, as if describing a disappointing soup. You're given a spear. It's splintered at the tip and smells like onions. No shield, but you get a belt pouch and a stern warning. Don't loot unless the looting bell rings. You march. The first few days are miserable. Your feet blister. The food is dry. The camp smells like unwashed feet and poorly buried fish. You're not entirely sure what the war is about. Something to do with borders, or honor, or someone's third cousin insulting someone else's horse. But as you travel, you learn. You learn how to sleep on dirt and be grateful for it. You learn how to clean your spear with river moss. You learn that knights snore louder than pigs and complain constantly about the taste of peasant bread. One night, you find yourself huddled by a fire with another levied man from a distant village. He's older, missing 2 fingers, and tells stories in bursts of coughs. War's just work, he says. Dig ditches, carry things, try not to get stepped on. Do you fight, you ask? Only if someone forgets their name, he says cryptically, then falls asleep. You never learn what that meant. Then finally, the day comes. A skirmish. That's the word used. Not a battle, not a siege, a skirmish. But it feels big enough to you. The enemy, probably French, or rebels, or disgruntled cheese merchants, is across the field. You're shoved into formation, your helmet askew. The knight gives a short speech. You understand about 4 words, one of which is glory. You clutch your spear and try not to cry. The fighting is chaos. You mostly stay out of the worst of it. Your group is assigned to hold the rear line, which seems to mean stand in mud and look brave. You do, sort of. A horse runs past you. A man yells something about turnips. Your friend throws open a bush. And then suddenly it's over. The enemy flees. Your side wins, or so the knight says. You return to camp exhausted, shaking, and somehow still alive. You're handed half a roasted rabbit and a small coin as pay. The rabbit is overcooked. The coin has someone else's face on it. You sleep hard that night, dreams full of crashing noise and blurred faces. In the morning, you're dismissed, just like that. The knight says, "You've served the crown. Go home. Don't cause trouble." Then he rides off, trailing dust and disdain. You walk back. The journey is slower, quieter. The blisters have hardened into calluses. Your back aches. Your coin pouch is light, but your mind is heavy. When you finally see the village, you feel something crack open inside you, relief, joy, fear, all tangled together. People run to greet you. Marta cries. Your cousin, limping slightly, announces that he punched a noble in the knee during the confusion. No one believes him, but they cheer anyway. You're home. Back to pigs, thistles, and leaky roofs. Back to muddy paths and morning bread. But something's changed. You stand a little taller. Not because you're proud, well, maybe a little, but because you're grateful. You survived war, you returned. And that, in the Middle Ages, makes you something close to legendary. The war feels like a dream now. A strange, noisy, half-remembered blur of mud, shouting, and metal. You're back in your village, back among the predictable rhythms of rural life, feeding goats, avoiding Marta's potions, and trying not to step in things best left unstepped. But time, as always, rolls forward, and with it comes one more mitzvah ordeal you're not quite prepared for, getting sick. It starts with a sniffle. You ignore it. You have work to do, firewood to split, a leaky roof tile to re-wedge, and a hen who seems to have entered a complicated emotional crisis. You can't afford to be sick. Then the cough sets in. Not a polite little ahem, but a deep, chest-rattling bark that echoes through the cottage like an angry goose in a barrel. You try the usual cures: hot broth, wrapping your feet in wool, breathing in steam from a pot of herbs. Nothing helps. Marta hears you wheezing and insists on a poultice made from mustard, vinegar, and a touch of ferret hair. You don't ask questions. You let her smear it on your chest. It burns. You smell like spicy soup for 3 days. Still, the fever comes. Your skin goes cold, then hot, then cold again. You shiver so hard your teeth rattle. You dream of floating above your bed, of saints and chickens whispering in Latin, of a donkey that judges your life choices. You're not sure if any of it's real. In the Middle Ages, illness is part of life. Common colds can turn deadly. A broken bone can fester. A stomach bug can sweep through a village like wildfire. Without antibiotics or proper sanitation, your survival depends on luck, youth, and whatever dried root Marta's been storing in a sock under her bed. The priest visits, murmuring a prayer and sprinkling water that smells suspiciously like ale. He suggests confession. Just in case. You confess to swearing at the goat twice. God understands, he says. Your family watches over you in shifts. Your mother wrings cloves and places them on your forehead. Your cousin makes soup. It's mostly onion. You pretend to enjoy it. The village healer, a man named Gil, who wears 6 layers of wool and carries a spoon carved from bone, arrives to offer remedies. He gives you something bitter and green. You drink it. You see colors, possibly even music. Days pass, or weeks. Time bends. You fade in and out, sometimes waking to birdsong, sometimes to thunder, once to Marta singing a lullaby to your foot. Historians still debate the effectiveness of medieval medicine. Some cures had real mare herbs like yarrow or willow bark contain compounds we now know have healing properties. Others, like bloodletting, did more harm than good. But most people relied on a mix of practical care, spiritual rituals, and hope. Eventually, somehow, you start to feel better. Your head clears, your strength returns slowly, you sit up. The sun feels real again. Food starts tasting like food instead of regret. You step outside for the first time in over a week. The village is just as you left it, noisy, muddy, and full of life. Children chase chickens. Someone yells about soup. Marta waves at you with a bunch of dried herbs and shouts, "I told you the foot song works." You smile, but illness leaves a mark. You're thinner. Your hands shake. You tire quickly. The priest calls it a trial. Your cousin calls it getting old. You call it a reminder. Because in this time and place, survival isn't just about avoiding swords or floods or noble taxes. It's about enduring the little things, the coughs, the chills, the endless, aching fatigue of simply being alive with no safety net beneath you. You return to work, gently, a little at a time. You help patch the roof. You mend a bucket. You visit the animals and find your favorite goat has given birth twins, both wobbly, both loud. You name them Saint Wheeze and Little Marta. The village welcomes you back in its own way. A shared loaf of bread, a wink from the blacksmith, a whole roasted onion left on your doorstep. Life continues, and you with it. And that's the secret no one tells you about living in the Middle Ages. It's not the lords or the laws or the miracles. It's endurance. It's waking up again and again, even when everything hurts and the weather hates you and your soup is just warm water with moral support. You wouldn't last a day in medieval times, they say. And yet, you have. Not because you're strong or clever or divinely chosen, but because you kept going. You hauled water and fixed roofs and danced at fairs and dodged spears and survived Marta's foot remedies. You lived. And that here, in this brutal, beautiful, muddy world, is more than enough. Now, let the candles burn low. Let the clatter of the day soften to whispers. Outside, the wind rustles the thatch, gentle now, not angry. You've survived the storm, the war, the illness, the tiny tragedies and the quiet victories that shape a life lived far from luxury. Your hands may ache, your feet may be worn, but they have carried you through it all. You've walked the muddy roads, held the rough wood of a plow, leaned against the cool stone of the church when the sun was high and your breath came hard. You've lived 100 days and one each filled with tasks, with laughter, with stubborn joy. There's something comforting in the rhythm of it all. The rising sun, the morning bread, the tolling bell, the shared stories by firelight. You've seen hardship, but also humor. You've touched the hard edge of history and softened it with kindness, with small moments of rest. So now, as the world dims around you, let your breath slow. Let your thoughts settle like dust on an empty path. You're safe. The village is quiet. The stars are out. Close your eyes. Let the chickens roost. Let the moon keep watch. Sleep well, traveler. You've earned it.